Welcome to the Goat's Gravy, the ultimate podcast tailored for young professionals navigating the dynamic world of sales and sales leadership. We are here to serve up a blend of mentorship and advice. In each episode, we dive deep into conversations with accomplished leaders and rising stars in the sales industry. Together, we explore their triumphs, challenges, and invaluable experiences. Our goal? To distill their insights into practical lessons that can seamlessly integrate into your own career journey. So whether you're a seasoned sales expert or just starting out, join us as we ladle out wisdom and inspiration, empowering you to excel in the ever-evolving landscape of sales. Onward we go. All right, welcome to another episode of the Goat's Gravy podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, a true titan in the world of technology sales and an all-around remarkable individual. Please join us in extending a hearty welcome to our good friend, Tony Blood.
Tony,
all
my
right,
man.
Tony.
How we doing?
Welcome, What's up, buddy?
Tony is the Executive Vice President of Sales at Ahead, bringing a wealth of experience and leadership to the table with 12 years under his belt at Ahead, where he initially served as the Managing Director in Illinois. Tony's been a key player in the company's growth from its 47th employee to its current, wow, this is impressive, 1,900 employees.
Boom.
Huge growth. So with an impressive 23-year career in technology sales, Tony's journey includes significant roles at industry giants such as Oracle, Sun Microsystems, Storage Tech, Agilysys, and CDW. But that's not all. His commitment to excellence extends beyond the boardroom. On a personal note, Tony is a devoted husband to Nancy, who's also making waves in technology sales. Together, they've celebrated 18 years of marriage and are the proud parents of 3 wonderful children, aged 16, 14, and 12. Education-wise, Tony holds an MBA from the prestigious Kellogg School of Business at Northwestern University, and he earned his undergraduate degree at Southern Illinois University. But Tony's influence doesn't stop there, Scotty.
No, it doesn't.
He generously lends his time and expertise to make a positive impact as a board member for Special Spaces in the Illinois chapter of the American Heart Association's Go Red for Women's Heart Health. Very impressive, dude. Love that you do all that. So without further ado, let's dive into the wisdom and insights with our good pal, Tony Blood.
Tony, welcome, buddy.
Welcome.
Thanks, Bills.
How's the day going?
It's good, man.
All right.
Looking at this production, very impressed.
Yeah.
Very impressed.
Well, thanks for joining us in studio, man. It means a ton that you came over, so thank you. So our listeners, Tony, they're young in career and, let's just say 20 to 35 years old. And we just want to kind of take you into the Wayback Machine real quick.
Sure.
So Southern Illinois?
Yes.
All right.
Kind of the Carbondale. Really.
Harvard, yeah. When I hear Southern Illinois, I hear Kellogg. All right.
They're pretty close.
Yeah, they're neighbors. Yeah. But yeah, take us back. And Billy and I get in a lot of conversations along with Dee about, what you're thinking about when you're in college.
Yep.
Did you have a vision of being this badass sales guy?
No. So actually I went to Southern Illinois because I thought I was going to go into radio TV.
Oh,
and so
nice.
Believe it or not,
Same with Billy.
Southern Illinois actually had one of the top radio TV programs down there. There's a lot of people from ESPN all come from Southern.
Very cool.
And after my freshman year, I'm like, as they start telling you where your first job is going to be, it's going to be like in Dubuque, Iowa. You're going to make
I actually looked at
$18,200 a year, right? And I'm like, I don't know if this sounds that appealing anymore, right? Do I want to live in Dubuque for the next 2 years and then just keep moving around the country and trying to kind of find your way? So then I'm like, what am I really going to be good at? I can sell, I think. And because I kind of did some selling in the past. I'm like, I think we're going to be a sales guy, right? Yeah. That's what we're going to kind of go to.
Yeah.
And then as I went through college, I kind of was president of the Greek system and that kind of stuff. And so I'm like, leadership was kind of something I knew maybe eventually I wanted to get into, but certainly I just knew I was so sick of being broke.
Yeah.
Like I just want to make money.
Love it.
So I came out of, when I was looking at different opportunities, I looked at things like Eli Lilly. I looked on the med device side, and then there was a company called CDW that was out there recruiting. Yeah. I didn't know much about tech sales, but I'm like, oh, this looks interesting. Of course, they offer us $22,000 a year. So I'm like, whoa, I went from 18 to 22, really big, with a $3,000 signing bonus.
Hello.
So,
but commissions,
but that's what that's how they lure you. Right. And of course I was such a little arrogant jerk, at 22 years old, but I'm like, I had a gigantic chip on my shoulder. I'm like, I can, there's like, just depends on how hard you want to work, how fast, how much money you can make. I'm like, that's it.
Yeah.
That's the equation. Like, I can do that. You know, I may not be as smart as the guys that went to like Illinois or some of these other schools. I'm like, I know I can just outwork them. And so that's kind of how I got into CDW, and I started working. I probably get to the office about 5:45 every day, set up your day for all the calls that you start making, right? And CDW just dial for dollars.
Yeah.
And their whole thing was, if you do 100 calls a day and spend 4.5 hours on a day, you'll make $100,000 within 3 years.
Wow.
I'm in.
I'm in. How do I do
so
it?
You're committed.
Let's go.
And that was it. And
so did they give you the playbook and that's what you knew to do? Or is that there's something inside of you that's like, I'm going to get there before everybody else and just grind?
So I will tell you, they have an awesome training program there. So I tell a lot of college kids, I'm like, go to CDW. They have such a great training kind of program. They're, that's a place where you just kind of, it's a factory, right? They send 100 people through the factory, maybe 20 people make it coming out of it after 2 years, which is part of the game.
Yeah.
But they give you kind of the basis and they teach you tech, right? Kind of what is this thing that you're selling, all this other stuff. So they actually have a pretty good program to learn. But then I think the other part really kind of when the rubber hits the road is like, are you really willing to work it? And it's very uncomfortable. People start cold calling.
Yeah.
Right? And so you just got to put yourself out there.
Billy, just excuse me 2 seconds. I just, when you said, I think I could do sales because you've done it before, because I think a lot of our listeners are thinking, what do I do? Do I get into tech? Is it med device? Is it finance? When you said to yourself sales, because I think I've done it before, what did you mean by that? Did you have a prior experience prior to getting into college?
So in college, I was selling ads.
Okay.
So I was selling the ad space, and then I sold for the newspaper, kind of selling print, that kind of thing. And so I was able to get people to kind of spend their money that way. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of a good gig. One, you have a little bit of freedom, but two, it's like I just love the commission aspect. Like I can just outwork you and make more money.
Yep. That's the theme.
That's
sorry, Billy.
No, I was just curious for the CDW experience, being in that environment, how competitive was it with your peers? How motivated were you based on rankings and all those things? I mean, is that type of environment?
It is 100% that environment.
Yeah. So talk about that culture.
Yeah. Every day they post how many phone calls you made, how many hours you're on the phone, because that's when you start those are your metrics, because you're just not selling. And then you start, every day the scoreboard, and they're constantly stack ranking you versus your 90 peers. Yep. Then they start grouping you 0 to 3 month people, 0 to 6 month people, 12 month, year on, right? So every single day you see where you stack rank. So they create that competition, right? They gamify the whole thing, which is, I happen to kind of like that. Yeah. So
totally.
And did it work? Did those 3 years of those calls get you that $100,000?
It absolutely did.
Wow. Yeah. That's awesome.
It absolutely did. And so you start just grinding. Once people are like, oh, you're crazy. You're here all the time. I'm like, yeah, dude, I'm broke. Like, I've got to start making some money,
I've always thought when people come to me, cause we've got kids similar age.
Yep.
My son's 20 and I'm trying to figure out, where do we put them so they can really start to understand what they want to do? And maybe it's sales, but I love the CDW. I love the Ahead. Is that somewhere where you'd recommend someone? Because in my mind, I'm thinking they get to really understand what piece of technology that may interest them.
Yep.
Is that kind of
a place like CDW is good because it's such a huge. It's a huge company now. When I was there, it was a $1.4 billion company, and now I think they're $25 billion.
Yeah.
So you get massive amounts of exposure to like tech, and some of that's good, some of that's bad.
Yep.
Right. What you don't get is you don't get to see like the inner workings of like a big manufacturer. So you don't get to see like what you do. But I do think you get great exposure to kind of see like what you like and what you don't.
Sure.
So.
And how long were you there? And then when you made a decision to leave, what was it that impacted that decision?
So I was the very first outside sales guy at CDW, and that's how I met Tim Frank.
Wow.
So I was running around Chicago in a suit, and they were like, here's your 30 accounts. They're spending like nothing with us, but go figure it out.
Right.
I'm like, okay, cool. I'll be the very first outside sales guy at CDW. Now that's kind of a cool thing. I was there for about 5 years, and the reality was because they didn't have an outside sales program, they didn't really know how to pay us. And so I kind of was vocal for a while, and I'm like, this just isn't, they don't know what they're doing yet.
Right.
And now it's funny, if you look back now, they had this massive outside sales force and all the other good stuff. But at the time, they just didn't know really what they were doing. So I'm like, I'm going to make a move at this point, because now I've got this outside sales experience. I'm definitely more marketable than when I was even a year ago. So after about 5 years, I left and went to Storage Tech, which was then acquired by Sun Microsystems, which was then acquired by Oracle.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I think my mom called me. She's like, you're why do you keep leaving jobs? I'm like, Mom, I'm not. I've only made one move.
Right.
She's like, but your email address keeps changing. I'm like, yeah, because we just keep getting acquired, right? So
yeah.
That's hilarious.
You mentioned the hard work piece, and this is what I think about a lot, because it's, when people morph into sales, they may think, hey, they see the money, they see the top line. There's no limit on what you can make. But you mentioned like 3 times this morning here on this show, hard work. So how do you gut check yourself, and what advice would you give people to even say, is this a good fit for you? Like, I'm trying to figure out the hard work piece, A, where it came from, and B, how do our listeners gut check if sales is for them? Because all 3 of us know the work that goes behind it. It's intense, and it's not for everybody. So
I think salespeople do one of 2 things. They either quit too early most of the time, right? Because like, I'm a huge believer in like persistence and consistency, right? That is, if you have those 2 things, like, one of the things we always struggle with, and I struggle with, is like, how do you interview somebody for grit? Because to me, that's like the number one quality.
Sure.
Like, and I struggle like identifying, like, does this person actually have that just tenacity, that grit? And I would love to get some guidance from you guys, how you guys interview for grit. Because for me, I don't think I've really nailed that piece of it yet. But I certainly think that is the one thing, like, how does a salesperson know if they have it? Like, it's, a lot of these cliches come out of sales for a reason, but it's like, can you get, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah.
Like, they work so hard and then they lose a sale. But it's like, do you have that tenacity to get back up, kind of dust yourself off and just get back in the game, right? So for me, it's like, do you ultimately like the selling experience, right? Do you what I love about sales is it's a game, right? It is I have something that I believe you will want, right? If I can position it the right way. And if I believe I'm correct and I've done my homework on you, that I think we're going to be a good fit together, I would like to start engaging in commerce with you, right?
Sure.
And so the whole idea is like, the gamification for me was like, I love that part. I loved the hunt. Like, I was a much better hunter than I was a farmer.
Right.
Right. Because for me, I like the, you say no, you say no. Now you're going to say yes.
Yeah.
Right. And for me, that was what I enjoyed the most. And I still enjoy the most. Right.
Yeah.
I love when people when we're working on new campaigns and they haven't bought from us. I'm like, well, we haven't done a good enough job, obviously, positioning ourselves for success yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Billy, that's an interesting question. I'd love to get your take on it. As far as how do you know grit yourself or you as a hiring manager? For me, I think, I told a story. I worked at UPS at one time, and your question on how do you interview for grit?
Yeah.
Like, I got asked a question, give me your toughest, craziest sales campaign. And I was working for UPS, and I told a story about, I put on the brown uniform and I would go to, I'd cold call buildings. After that, I'd put plain clothes on and I'd follow the FedEx trucks around to see where their stops were. Like, basically, literally following them around, writing down addresses, and then I would go and try to steal those accounts. And this guy, I told that story to this guy.
Yes.
He's like, I got to hire this guy. This guy's got grit, and he's kind of crazy. So I think but Billy, what about you? Like, how do you determine if someone's got the grit for sales? And
I agree, Tony. I think it's hard to find that. Just in an interview, I think when you're in person meeting with someone, I always prefer, like, nowadays, especially, I typically see someone after they've been through multiple interviews, and it's usually a Zoom or a phone call.
Yep.
But I think it's really just questioning. I like to dig into personal or professional adversities and really learning. Something I learned early on in my career from when I was with Intuitive Surgical. They interviewed really well, but they were always looking for people that maybe fought through adversity or had the tenacity, because selling capital equipment, or we were selling robotic systems, it was not easy. Like, there's a whole process you got to follow, and you got to go through a lot to get to the finish line. And so I think that's just, if you can get them storytelling and talking about their career and trying to pull out some of those adversities, and then really dig into that and see, do they just kind of give a softball? It's like a pretty basic thing they work through. Or is it some serious adversity?
Yep. Yep. And I think a lot of times, we read all these books, and you always talk about, like, the 25% of sales reps quit after the first call, 50% of sales reps quit after the second call, 75 after the third, and, like, goes all the way to the 10th call. And I have this story that I tell a lot of the younger guys about, again, kind of how crazy I was back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
But so at CDW, you would get there, you kind of plan your day. So I would start calling on the East Coast, and then I'd work on the Central, I'd work in the Mountain, and then I'd work all, Pacific Coast, and even out to Hawaii when it was late at night.
Mm-hmm.
But I tell this story because I was from, originally from Colorado. And so I knew I could, you're always trying to be relatable, right? So I'm like, okay, cool. I can talk about the Broncos. I can talk about skiing. I can do this and that. So I put a huge focus, of course, certainly in Chicago and, some of the places out in New York where I knew I could kind of talk shop a little bit. But Denver was a place I put a ton of focus on. And so I went after a company called Janus Mutual Funds. You guys are familiar with them.
I remember them, yeah.
So I found out this guy's name. His name was Tom Sharkey. He was he was a chief procurement officer at Janus Mutual. And I called him, and the first time I leave him kind of your classic, hey, Tony Blood, CDW, maybe your new account manager, blah, 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 blah. Your new account manager, like he had one before, which obviously he never did.
Right.
But you're kind of trying to create a little, who the hell's this kid again, And then I called him again. After the third call, I'm like, no, let's just have some fun with this. So I called him every day at 2:00, and I called him every Friday at 2:00. And I got so crazy into the point where I'm like, hey, Tom, Tony Blood. And I would tell him a joke. I'm like, and I would just hang up the phone. And then, because this is all through voicemail, right?
Mm-hmm.
I called him again, like Friday at 2:00. I'm like, hey, Tom, Tony Blood, I'm going to go get some milk, eggs, butter at the grocery store. Call me if you need anything. Click.
Sure.
And then I did this like 13 Fridays in a row.
Yeah.
At 2:00. And all of a sudden he picks up on the 14th time.
Oh man.
He's like,
and you froze.
No. The best part was he goes, Tony Blood. I go, Tom, send me the voicemail. And he starts dying, right? He just starts
send me the voicemail.
Because he starts dying. He's like, listen, he goes, all right, kid, if you're going to work this hard when I don't do business with you, I'm interested to see what happens when we do.
Yeah.
Wow.
I love it.
And I'm like,
dude, that's incredible.
Game on.
Yeah.
And he sent me about $500,000 worth of business within a week.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so
dude, that's
cool.
incredible.
It was really cool. So that's kind of the
that's
story.
A great story.
I tell a lot of kids that because I'm like, this is like, guys, this is a game, right? Like you have nothing.
Yeah.
So what are you afraid to lose?
Sure.
Well, it's funny when I get so many emails, like cold call emails that just come in, and I always look at the subject lines, like, and most of the time I'm deleting pretty quick. It's just a bunch of, and I know a lot of people use software now, so it just comes over and over and over, but every now and then you see like a creative one, like something like that, and it'll catch my eye. And then if I get another one from them and it's kind of interesting, even if it's something that we would never use or whatever, I'll typically then send a note back like, hey,
well played.
This doesn't make sense, but you're doing a great job.
Well played.
Yeah.
I do the same thing because it's like when they do their homework and they actually research you, like, hey, Scott, hey, Billy, I saw you wrote this in LinkedIn, or I looked at your Twitter and I happen to agree with you, but the question I have, I'm like, ooh, well played.
Anything that keeps it personal. Like, because two things come to mind when you're telling that story. Like, how do you get someone's attention? Because certainly sales folks will call on us for various reasons. And I think it's two things. One, I think the use of video should be used more, to introduce yourself or connect yourself to, like you're saying, what's something personal about you, and you incorporate in video at the same time. I think that's an interesting way to do it. But like, why would I pay attention? Hey, Tony Blood sent me your way, right? That's the key. Yeah. Like with LinkedIn now, we can link in, and this is a little Tim Frank-ism. We got to bring Timmy up. And it's, when you're interviewing for a job, find 3 people that are connected to me somehow. And if you can do that, I'll give you your first interview. You know what I mean? It's like forcing someone to do the homework about you. And with the internet and with LinkedIn, I mean, that's kind of easy.
It's really easy.
And people just don't take the time to do it.
For it not to,
right.
To do it.
Right.
I totally agree. And I think we'll talk about that later when we get to Demetri at the quick hits, because I think preparation is a big one. And unfortunately, a lot of people just skip basic steps that could get them to go so much further, so much faster. But going back to the career, so obviously you're coming across of some of those just super self-motivated, which is awesome. Along the journey, was there, did you seek out mentorship? Was there someone that took you under their wing, or maybe talk about some people that had a big impact on your career early on?
So speaking of which, Tim Frank. So Tim and I were
Tim Frank.
So if you guys think my voice is low, he sounds like Darth Vader. Okay, so whenever you get him out here, you guys are going to be like, Demetri may have to adjust the mic a little bit. But Tim was a guy when I got into leadership, right? Tim was a guy who went to, so we both kind of split paths. He went into EMC leadership.
Yeah.
And I think he was Scotty's boss at one point.
Yep.
And then I went to the other path. I went into leadership at this company called Agilysys. But, I always looked to Tim I'd call him a lot of times, like, hey, man, this is what I'm thinking, from a leadership side. Am I thinking about this the right way? Mm-hmm. So I would always seek out mentors. And I love to find mentors in our industry. And then I would find people outside of our industry.
That's a great point.
Because I didn't want it to get too personal. I wanted somebody who can kind of coach me from the outside. So I would have people outside of it. And there's probably three of us. I still go to them today.
Yeah.
Like, especially as we start talking about cultures, these guys have made acquisitions and all this other stuff. And they, they could retire if they wanted to, but they're not.
Right.
And so I asked them, like, this is what we're kind of facing right now. Am I doing this the right way? Or do you have any ideas, like, other ways we can approach this? Because it's like, God knows we don't have all the answers. So I'm always looking to find other people who maybe have done this before, or at least have had a taste of it. And then how do we incorporate it?
So Tony, we're talking about kind of mentors and what makes a really good mentor. So I know Timmy Frank, I've got my own opinions on why I think he's a great mentor. Why do you think he is?
He cares first and foremost. He cares about you as a person. Like, he is a very, very loyal guy.
Yeah.
And he expects a lot of you. But he also is willing to give, and Timmy, at the heart of who he is, he's a teacher, right?
Yeah.
Like, if Timmy retires, in a few years, I guarantee there will be a teaching aspect to him at some point.
Yep.
Whether he's teaching college kids, doing some more mentorship, doing something for philanthropy, he loves to teach.
Yeah.
And so I think ultimately he likes to teach because he cares.
Yeah.
And I think he wants to bring the best out of people. And I think because he's, 4 years older than me, I think he's kind of been that for me, right? He's a guy who's 4 years, he got there a little earlier than I did from the leadership side. And then he was able to bring me with him. Right.
Sure.
So he recruited me over to AHEAD, 12 years ago. And then, again, it's, people that we were kind of talking earlier, right? Should you have a mentor that works, that you work for? Maybe, maybe not. Yep. I think Tim certainly plays that part for me, but I also do seek outside counsel from a mentorship as well, because I think it's, again, just getting different perspectives.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get too close.
Yeah,
sure.
I think that's really important. It's funny. I've always I call it kind of my personal board, right? I've got a handful of people that are my go-to for any big decision I'm making in life or anything that goes on. And some of them are, I have leaders that I work with today that are mentoring me in current role, peers. Also people that report to me, I learn a lot from. Sure. And they, you have reverse mentorship there, and I love that. But like, I'll go to Scott often, we're in different industries. So I think it's always good to get different people's perspective, anything from, a global kickoff meeting, some sort of presentation, whatever it is, but just to go talk to people. How are you mentoring others now? You had a great mentor in Tim. How are you giving that back?
Yeah. So I've got quite a few younger, very similar folks to the people that are going to be listening to this, is like a lot of young guys and gals. They're interested in getting into sales because they're trying to, how do I cut my teeth and get in? Okay. That's part of it. But I think where it's really fun is the people that when they start going in their career and they're trying to make some decisions. Do I want to go into leadership? Do I want to continue to just be an IC?
Right.
And I think for me, I love, like, probably very similar to Tim, like, I love to teach and help. And like, I'm a big believer in, like, give, and don't expect anything back. But guess what happens? Lots of it comes back.
Sure.
Right. So if you guys have ever read that book, Go Giver, it's kind of the whole principle behind that book. It's just give, and give blindly and give big.
Yeah. Without an expectation.
No.
That's right.
Just give. Yeah. Right. And the world will figure out a way to pay you back in spades, and just don't think about it and watch what happens.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think that's a big thing in our prep here today was the concept of networking.
Yep.
Right. And as a mentor is what I'm hearing you say, and this is something that I like to do as well, is part of the mentorship is expanding the network and giving people ideas on where to go beyond you based on their situation and where they want to go. Talk to us a little bit about why you think networking is the most important thing. Like, based on our prep, you were pretty fired up about that this morning, but walk us through that. What does that mean to you?
Well, everyone's heard that saying, you are the sum of the 5 closest people that you spend the most amount of time with, right? And I 100% believe that.
Yeah.
Right. They always say, like, if you hang out with these 5 people, I bet your incomes are all within 10% of each other. Right. That's kind of the thing. So it's like, who do you actually, if you want, like Tony Robbins has this famous quote, if you want to change your life, change your network. Right. He talks about that a lot. It's 100% true. Right. So it's like, for me, it's like, it's not that I'm not trying to climb the ladder, but like, if there's people that I find fascinating, or that I'm like, I'll read about some, I used to read when I was in my 20s, I'd read Crane Chicago, right? Trying to figure out, like, who's the next client I want to go after type thing, right?
Yeah.
But there'd be cool stories, and there would be like this real estate developer guy. I'm like, oh, that guy's really cool. What he's doing is awesome. He's giving back to the community. He's making a ton of money. Like, this is a cool dude. So I just reached out to him.
Yeah.
Said, hey, Michael, Tony Blood, completely not in your industry.
Yeah.
I'd love to buy you lunch, because frankly, what you're doing, I just wanted to, see if I could learn a few things from you. Yeah. Right. So just kind of like awesome. Expanding your network with, again, I didn't want anything. I guess what I wanted ultimately was just, could he teach me a couple things I wasn't thinking about?
Yeah.
Right. I wasn't looking for a job. I wasn't looking for money. It was just like, dude, I read about you. I think this is super cool.
Yeah.
I'd love to could I buy you lunch?
Was he afraid of you?
Not until he saw me. Not until he saw me.
Well,
he was a wee little man.
Dude, that's really good advice, because I do think, like, always try to learn, right? If you just look at different people and their careers and their stories, and that helps you go create your own. And that's what I love about what you've done. And you talked also a little bit earlier about self-development, and you put a lot of energy into that. So talk to us about, like, what are those things that you do to sharpen the axe?
We are all so broken. So for me, it's like, what else can I do to just get 1% better, 1% better, 1% better? So I read a ton, I listen to a ton of podcasts, and then the other thing is too, is I join certain, like, business groups, again, in the stream of like leadership and just different ideas, and kind of ingratiating yourself and learning from different industries. So some of these masterminds that you can join, highly recommend doing some of those things. One, in your industry, but more specifically, not in your industry.
Yeah.
I joined an entrepreneurial one, and people are like, oh, but you don't own your business. I'm like, I don't, but I can learn an absolute ton from all these small business, medium business guys. And that, for me, is like, expanding your network is part of that you're going to get that naturally. But the other part from the self-development is, like, you are going to pick up little nuggets from everybody. And just your ability to like build a foundation and recognize, like, every day you should try to do something different.
Yeah.
Right? Whether it's working out, just that, to me, that's also part of self-development. It's like, what do you do that's like going to be your non-negotiables, right? People always talk about, what are your non-negotiables? Like, for me, it's like working out every day. It has to be a non-negotiable.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm working with my son on, and I frankly working to get better myself, because I think you bring up a lot of cool ideas. How do you expand your network? Working out, eating right. A lot of these things have nothing to do with your daily objective at work, which is to drive a number.
Right.
And this is where it's a weakness of mine. And I see it in my son, as far as getting the plan tight. And how do you do that when your brain is like exploding in so many different ways? How do you find the time to do some of these things you're referencing?
You have to have structure. Like, well, again, some things, I always say I get up 4:30 in the morning because it's selfish. Right? It's completely selfishly motivated. It's my time. Nobody's emailing me. No one's texting me. No one's calling me. It's like, I have an hour and a half that it's just me.
Yep.
Like, my kids aren't up. My wife's not asking me for anything. It's just my time. So for me, like, I make that time every day, whether I'm on the road or not. I just get up, go to the gym. For me, it's like a great foundation. You got to start the day.
Sure.
And from there, again, I also think it gives me a bunch more energy, because in my mind, I think a lot, right? I don't listen to a lot of music when I work out. I just think a lot. And a lot of times, of course, you are thinking about work and you think about the things you got to knock out that day. But for me, that's kind of where I set the foundation of the day. And then from there, it's like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to call Scott. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm like, hey, Billy's, blah, 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 right? You just kind of figure out all these things that you do. And a lot of times you're on your phone, you just put a little note. These are the things you kind of knock out.
Yeah. So you literally, as you go into a day, you have it dialed in, non-work related in your schedule.
100%.
That's pretty cool.
100%.
And
then how do you do, like, when you're wrapping up a day, do you start planning out what you're going to do the following day, or do you do that before you go to sleep, or is that after the workout you start plotting out what you got to do, your to-do list?
I wish I said it. I wish I was that disciplined.
Calculated.
I'm just not. I mean, a lot of times I take whatever the day throws at me, and that is frankly going to kind of navigate what I'm going to do the next day.
Yeah.
But I probably do a poor job at night of thinking about the next day. Cause I frankly, it's probably because I've done a decent job in the mornings of making sure all the things like I'm going to knock out these 5 things today as well. Right. So I'll put those in my little notes, must do's, and then I kind of do that.
Yeah. So, hey, Tony, just to change directions for a moment. Obviously you were very successful as a seller. What was it, or what was your story in terms of how you ended up taking that step into leadership?
Yeah. So I think I always knew I wanted to get into leadership, like even early in my sales career. I think I thought I was a pretty decent leader in college and, going to get president of the fraternity and the Greek system, that kind of stuff. And then I'm like, I had some good mentors that were good leaders, right? They were guys who made the transition from being good sellers to good leaders, because not every good athlete makes a great coach, but then I was fortunate. The people that I did have exposure to were good sellers, became great coaches. And so for me, I'm like, that was kind of something I knew I always wanted to kind of try. And I thought I was going to be pretty decent at it. And it's so funny, like how, like we were talking before this, like your leadership styles have to change based on your circumstance. When I was with a big company, we used to, like, honestly, it was like managing out the bottom. Your classic GE, you just fire the bottom 15% like every year. And that it just kind of becomes more like a program and I didn't feel like real leadership. Then I got over on the partner side and I felt like that was like much more of a leadership role for me.
Yeah. The leader, like I've got a couple examples where great sellers and they get in, you think they're going to be a great leader and they don't make it. So as you work with leaders, what are the telltale signs as they become, say that first year on whether you think they're going to make it or not?
It's so funny because we always think about like these great sellers, like, God, why did you suck so bad as a leader? Right. And I think a lot of it is them, like they were such good sellers and they only thought about it one way. Yeah. Right. It was their way. And I think good leaders, and I think probably I was very similar when I first got into it, but then I'm like, hold on, there's probably a bunch of different ways you can solve this. And they probably have, again, a lot of these folks have been very successful on the sales side. So it's like, how as manager should I be adapting? Sure. How should I try to, like, Billy, you maybe respond one way, Scott may respond another. I have to change. They're not going to change, right? Because it's more about, I think it's the sales manager who can actually kind of check their ego at the door. Yep. And understand where my strengths are and frankly where my weaknesses are, and figure out how some of my strengths can help you, Billy, rise. And I have to maybe radically change the way I talk to Scott because Scott's not going to respond the same way I talk to Billy. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So for me, it's just understand, like, check your ego at the door and then try to figure out, like, again, what can I give? What can I give? What can I give to you to elevate you? And how are you going to respond to me? Yeah. So,
we know one person in our network. I won't call him out, although I really like to right now, but I'm not going to. But this gentleman worked for me, worked for you, and just a phenomenal seller, like off the charts. You've met him, and just super successful, super creative, and always focused on the customer, and just love the guy. But he tried his hand at leading, and it was a train wreck. And I always thought about it as, he just wasn't in a mode to be able to relinquish and just give to others, right? Like be 100% servant leadership. Bill McDermott talks about that all the time. And that was it. So I didn't know exactly. I thought he was going to be a great leader personally, but he just stumbled and he couldn't stop thinking about himself. Right. And that's not a bad thing because that's what does make him so great as a seller. Correct. So I just found that to be interesting.
I think sometimes you see, certainly I know when I got promoted, my first leadership role, I wasn't ready. And I think often people get promoted probably before they're ready. And I remember, early on, just I wanted everyone to operate the way I operated. Right. And that's not the way it works. And thank goodness I had a great mentor that saw that happening and pulled me out of a tailspin. And I think that's really important. So when you think about people that you have in your sales organization, are you intentional about preparing them? Or if you have someone that wants to get into leadership, I guess, what are those things that you do to kind of pressure test, stretch assignments or whatever it looks like to get them ready for that leadership role?
So we are a very unique organization where we don't typically have a lot of sales folks who want to make the leap into leadership. Like, it's just a very different organization. Everywhere else I've been, that's been kind of the classic mode. Here, the sales folks that we have, now the managers are different, right? So there's a lot of the guys who are in sales leadership, they certainly want to go up the ranks. And I guess if I look back at it now. I'm traditionally thinking about from a seller going into leadership. And I think I have to look at, for this question, I would say the current leaders that we have and how do we identify the next, like, EVP, right? Somebody who's going to take my job someday. So I think it's more about understanding where am I trying to go with this? Where they want to, we identify where their superpowers are. Yeah. And then how do we actually push more of that? Harness, yeah. And then let them kind of bring up their teams with them. And then of course eventually take my gig.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think it's important. Like I've always told the sales organization, like, you don't have to have a title to be a leader, and that's pretty obvious, but you can see the people that really step up and do it. They're carrying their teammates. And that's advice I always give to people that are interested in leadership. It's like, well, don't wait to get the title. Like, start doing it now, lead people forward, share your successes, right? Influence up, down, all around. Yeah. And that's how you'll figure out. And if you enjoy that, pick someone to mentor and start coaching. Yeah. And if you enjoy that, then you're going to know you're probably going to do really well as a leader.
Dude, that's a really good point. As I get older, I'm kind of an old dude, and I sound like an old guy every week, and it kills me, but I'm starting to hear repetitive nature about things that I'm saying and giving advice to people. One of which is exactly what you just said. Start doing the job before you get the job. Start doing it now. How can you do it? And us as leaders, I think it's important to give people the opportunity to see if it's a fit. Yeah. So if I went to this gentleman that we were referencing and I did my job better, I would have said, hey, why don't you take care of these two folks and see, how you can mentor them. And, we probably would have seen some resistance there and not focused on it because he wanted to focus on himself and driving, sales. So I think it's on us.
Did you catch that early on? Like when he started stumbling, I guess, what were you doing to try to lead him?
Did you recognize it? Did you recognize that he was stumbling because of his personal motivations?
Yeah. In the first, I think the ramp time is 6 to 9 months on any new gig. So it was hard for me to understand because you got to get your own style going. And he was actually doing some really cool things like, setting out targets for net new and buying like these expensive bottles of champagne and putting the names on that customer as a target. Like some really cool, aggressive things to do that are unique.
It's clearly the tech industry because we can't do that medical device.
Yeah. So when the number starts to go sideways and you really show your true colors when the number's off, and then it wasn't great, and it got toxic and worse and pointing fingers and that type of thing. And then we all came to the realization it wasn't a good fit, and that's fine. And then he goes back and he's probably one of the best individual contributors in tech.
That's awesome.
In the area. So,
and he's probably a lot happier now, totally, back 100%. In that seat.
Totally happier. 100%. Yeah. Hey, Tony, there's a theme here today as far as giving back, right? And I know you spend, a portion of your time giving back. And I think one thing we all have in common is special spaces.
Yep.
Tell the listeners, tell us, why do you think that's an important part of your life? Because I think a lot of people get caught up in work, head down, and they can't get out of their own way. Why is it important for you to give back, and why special spaces?
Well, I think, the three of us are all very, very, very blessed, right? In terms of we got an opportunity to do something good. We made it both hopefully monetarily, but also we built great networks, good people. And so for me, it's like, I've been very blessed and I have the opportunity to do something really cool, which is give back, and special spaces, especially as a parent and, seeing these kids that go through this thing and they're battling cancer. It's like, God, I want to give more, because you just see like, they just need it. Like, and you see, especially with special spaces, like how much joy you can bring a family. And then the other part too, is like, so Lurie's Children's is a client of ours. Yep. I go into that lobby and every single time I'm giving away the farm. Yeah. Right. Because it's just like, you just see these parents and you just see the stress and you see the kids and they're just battling, right? They're just tough, trying to be tough little troopers. And so for our, we can give a little bit of time and money and resources and exposure to special spaces. Like, think about the impact you can have, not just with one family, but the more exposure we can give special spaces, the more and more kids and more families can get help and get, honestly, relief. Yeah. Right? They get a little relief in their life.
Yeah. Right? So do you think that helps you? Do you think it kind of ricochets back to you to kind of bring more energy into your everyday life? Because some people they might say, hey, I'm too busy, which, by the way, if they don't want to give back, I'm not judging. But I'm just trying to say, yeah, maybe I'm a little judgy. But how does that help you become a better leader?
In the theme of like servant leadership.
Yeah.
Right. I think that it's not about me. It's like, if I can be a conduit to giving exposure or giving relief or giving money, like it's not about, honestly, it's just not about me. It's about how can I give back to give better exposure. So yeah, I think it does make me a better leader, because I think if you're just so concentrated on just business and just work, I actually don't think you're going to be that good of a leader, because your exposure, like your sphere of influence isn't going to be that big. Yeah. Like the bigger you make your world, the more you can bring back to your team, to your clients, et cetera. So it's more about like my exposure is going to be different, and hopefully better.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I think stepping away from your everyday, where all, 80% of your energy is going into it, and doing something different. And I also think it's, you get humbled in a way, right? You go in these situations and you go through these different experiences. And to your point, you recognize how fortunate we really are. And then you can carry that back into the work world. We all get to drive a number, and that's what's hanging over our head. That's the profession we chose.
Yep.
But you realize, as important as that number is, there's a lot of things out there that are equally important.
Yep.
And I do think it helps you take a different approach to the work, for sure.
Well, I think also in our space, I mean, what we do is not rocket science. When the med device said, you guys can save lives with a lot of things we do. We don't save lives with anything we do.
No. We cost lives.
Yeah. So we don't what I tell my team all the time, what we do isn't hard. Yeah. It's just hard work.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. So your side is really different, but for us, it's like, we're not solving cancer. Right? Sure. We're solving technology stuff, which is a super important thing. And it's helping change the world. It really is.
It is.
But, I don't know, it's kind of where I'm looking at. I know where I stand in the grand scheme of things,
Yeah. Billy knows where he stands too. He's just not telling us. So Tony, kind of in conclusion here, before we get to the quick hits, GOAT's gravy. You are one of the GOATs in my network. So thank you for coming in. I think you're a true pro. Advice for our listeners, as you kind of distill down a couple things that's important to you as you give advice to some of these younger and career folks. Do you boil that down into a couple things that you think through, that you give kind of advice to the folks that you're mentoring, or how do you distill it down? A couple takeaways.
One, really take a hard look at your network, right? So I would say, two things I look at right away are network and consistency, and that persistence kind of grit thing we talked about before. So early in your career, like as a salesperson, can you take an honest look at yourself? Have you really been persistent? Have you really been consistent? So it's like a lot of people just give up too early, right? Yep. They didn't either put in the necessarily groundwork to get prepared, to do the right things on the sales calls. And you got to be real honest with yourself. Like, this is what, did you really give this a shot? So I would say, if you're going to evaluate sales, kind of how we started the conversation, is sales right for you? Did you really do all the things necessary that you really need to do to see if you could have been successful?
Sure.
So I think that's part of it. The other part is your network. Like, give yourself exposure into different areas and things that you might be interested in. And there might be things like, especially like if you're young and you're like not really sure if do you like tech, do you like med device, do you like pharmaceutical, like get exposure to things that you might have a huge passion for.
Sure.
Right. There are things that I learned like going through grad school that I learned about like certain industries that I'm like, I knew nothing about, like Yankee Candle or a piano company. I'm like, wow, what a fascinating business. Like super cool. I also learned businesses like pharmaceutical I despised, right? I just hated that business, but they're just getting yourself that kind of exposure where you can look across, like, again, not just from a sales guy, but just exposure to an industry is like, maybe I get exposed to things like special space. I want to go nonprofit. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Right. But it's more about getting yourself exposure, creating that network to help you build and see a bigger world. And then what you can do to kind of tap into that. And then maybe that's something else you want to chase.
That's great advice.
Really well said. And I know we're going to do the quick hits. So I have a couple more questions. I want to talk a little bit about prep, but the networking piece is just so important. And I had a leader give me a book called Never Eat Alone.
Yeah.
Early in my career, you read that, and it's just, to not only, 25 years in, still reach out to some of those people early in the career and just constantly checking with people, and you learn so much from keeping those relationships. I think that's the best advice you can provide. Like, just keep networking, and make every conversation a learning environment. I think that's huge. So Demetri, you want to take us to our quick hits?
Yeah, what's happening, Tony? This has been great.
Thanks,
really,
Demetri.
our quick hits is just to give our audience just some of the nuggets that you've learned throughout your career. And we want to start with prospecting because that's kind of where everything begins in the sales process. So when you were first starting out, what was like one of the most effective strategies for identifying potential customers that you could work with?
Doing your homework and figuring out where your products, your services will be able to meet them and create value for them. So it's more about being very specific and being very targeted, not trying to cast a wide net, but being very, very specific about the clients that you can drive value for them. So it's probably being very specific.
Sweet. What's your best tip for somebody that's never networked before? What a conversation starter? Like, what do they do? They're just new to this. Like,
yeah, the easiest answer is the real answer is you've got to put yourself out there. Like, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. You have to go ask for things and ask for meetings and, approach people that frankly is maybe not natural, right? But I go to these meetings a lot, and these are seasoned pros that we go to. And you'll go to these awards dinners and you will see the same three people talking to the same three people. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at them like, you look around at who's in this room. Like It is a cast of like some of the most influential people in Chicago from a technology side. And I'm like, just go up and meet them. Like, they're just normal people. Just go, hey, Tony Blood, nice to meet you. Blah, blah. Like, the thing is, like, the number one thing I say is just put yourself out there. Like, get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know you said grit, but what other qualities are you looking for in a sales candidate?
Someone who's prepared, someone's going to do their homework, someone who is aware of like their superpowers and where they can really drive value for a client or for a business. But like the hardest thing for me, again, I think is grit, because this is kind of a dirt, like not dirty, but it's just a hard job.
Yeah. And
it's a very thankless job until the paycheck comes, right? So it's like grit is the number one thing. But I think also someone like preparation. They always say preparation meets opportunity is the recipe for success. So.
Yep. Well, real quick on that, because I know Scott's pretty big. So when interviewing, like, sales is so at the end of the day, if you simplify it, right, it's preparation, execution, and follow up. And I agree with you. Preparation is huge. And when you show up for an interview, even on a Zoom or something, it's so easy to see the difference of someone that really took time to prep and the type of questions they ask. But I just had this happen to me this week. I had a phenomenal interview with someone on Monday, and it's Saturday, no follow-up. And I know, Scotty, that is like, for you will not accept that, right? It's pretty much a showstopper for you.
Yeah, I just, for our listeners out there, just the basics of follow-up are just, and I got this from Timmy. Timmy's a nut about the follow-up. And, as I pursue a job and, myself, I'd like to, assess a situation to just kind of dumb it down real quick. What did you learn from that interview? What are the actions behind the interview? And what did that person contribute to the plan? Right? If I can do those three things.
Contribute to the plan. What do you mean by that?
Like, I'll have a plan, a business plan if I'm pursuing an opportunity. And this is for everyone out there. If you're pursuing an opportunity, come up with a plan, put it on 2 pages so an executive can wrap their head around it, not 10. And then the follow-up is, what did you learn? What's the action? And how did that individual help shape the plan? And then send it to them. The next person, and oftentimes these interviews are exhausting. Like, there's 7 people you got to go through. Yep. At the end of that 7th, you have 7 versions of the plan, and now it's nice and tight. And at the end, you send it to everyone. Hey, I appreciate everyone's participation in the plan. You've all helped shape this. But yeah, the key is in an email or a text or whatever you may want to do. What did you learn? What's the action? How did they shape the plan? If you do that, you're going to just blow people away. Because to your point, Billy, really good salespeople are not doing the basics. And that is not going to work, right, in the real world, because how are our customers going to interact with them? They're going to expect the follow-up tight, so.
Yeah, and I equate it to if it's a business relationship, they're interviewing for a job. If this is really important to you, and by the way, you took all this time to prepare and have an excellent interaction to not close the loop, just that one last piece, right? And to me, you can teach you that. So I think you can rebound from it. If I really like this person and my leader wants to hire him, like we can talk through that. That's feedback to give them. But the fear for me, it's a little bit of a red flag. Like, okay, are they going to do that with customers and not follow up? And are they not going to have that perseverance you talk about? You just got to stay on top of it when things get tough. Are they going to, it's a little thing, but it's something that you kind of taught me early on to pay attention to because that's a showstopper.
I think like just, my one of my favorite quotes of all time is you prioritize what you make a priority. It sounds so simplistic, but if you really break it down, like this is what you decided to not make this also a priority.
Sure.
Right. Like that's everything.
Yeah.
All right, D.
Well, sweet. I think we covered follow-up, but prepping for sales calls, right? What does that homework process look like? And we're talking to the person that just accepted their first SDR role, and they're jumping on the call.
I love the question. And I think this is one of the things like this is a control the controllables, right? This is something there is zero excuses. The amount of data that we have at our fingertips that an SDR would have at their fingertips is mind boggling. And what we talked about earlier about how do you make it personal? Like we have Twitter, we have LinkedIn, we have the internet. You can scour everybody. You can find something that somebody did 10 years ago. You can find an interview that they were at. Like the ability for us to make, I always try to find out something personal about that person, like a perspective that they have that I can weave into a conversational first meeting. Like, hey, and think about this, like, how cool does it make you feel? Like, hey, Scott, I was doing my homework on you. Your immediate reaction is like, okay.
Oh, you're talking about me?
Yeah.
Oh, let me pay attention.
Right.
So about me?
Yeah. And that's, so they're like, okay, I want to see what kind of homework you did on me. So you're kind of, you're leaning in a little bit. And then all of a sudden it's like, I saw you did this. I saw your perspective on this. And then they ask you about it. Now they've kind of flipped the script. It's not about them. They're asking you some things right now.
Yeah.
And it's like your ability to make this engagement from a client to a salesperson piece is so easy now. Like it just is, especially if you have all your canned things that you want to talk about from your business side. That's the easy part. I think the part that is how you make it relatable. Like it's easy now, but it should be fun. Again, this is a game. It should be a fun thing to do. It's like, do your homework, make it a fun conversation, make something personal where they're going to remember you. And your only job as a salesperson on your first call is what? Get to the second call.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And just I'd use LinkedIn. I'm helping some younger and career folks. How easy is it to do before a meeting? And I'm going to meet with you, Tony, for the first time. I'm going to link in with you because I know you check it, right? And I don't know how frequently you do, but email's it's almost an afterthought these days, so it's text if you don't have the cell phone, but go link in with someone. Hey, looking forward to the meeting and notice this and this, like you're setting the table before you even, or that's a good way to get a meeting.
Yeah. Or the other thing with LinkedIn, hey, I see you're connected to so-and-so and so-and-so. So am I.
There's your network piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, there's no excuses for not doing it because it's just easy now.
Yep.
Yeah. That's beautiful. What are your daily habits outside of waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning are huge?
I mean, certainly working out is definitely a foundation for me. As I mentioned, it kind of sets the tone for the day. And I think the other part is tapping into the network. One of the things I instituted at the beginning of this year was three reach outs from my network, my basically a dormant network. Like I've got 5,000 connections on LinkedIn. So it's like I'm going to reach out to 3 people a week that I haven't talked to in a long time.
Good for you.
And it's just that networking piece. It's forced networking.
That's great.
But it's like, I read this book and it was, kind of like you have this dormant network. Like, what are you doing to keep it alive? And a lot of it's just that. So I'll go through and I'm like, these are 3 people I want to reach out to. And it could be former clients. It could be people in my network. It could be friends from college, right? That I just haven't talked to in a while. But it's like kind of that forced networking piece of it, just keeping that alive. Yeah. So I think that's part of it. And then certainly like the daily habits are figuring out what I need to give, I mean that in the real way. Like what can I provide out to my team, some clients, some people internally? Like I'm trying to figure out some things like every day that I can actually put out there to, give and again, not looking for anything.
Yeah. I love the 3 people a week.
Yep.
Because as a salesperson, when we start selling to power and we have relationships at the executive level, we tend to hit and run. And man, is that dangerous. Yeah. So to kind of even the basics of reaching out for customers and just to say, hey, how you doing?
Yep.
Any way I can help you out? Or I noticed X, Y, Z. I don't do a great job of that. But I think our listeners, if you just kind of, once you start building a customer base and you kind of keep track of who, all your customers, I like that 3 per week. I love that idea.
And the other thing, Timmy will say no email should be longer than one screen of an iPhone.
Right.
What we always say, if it's 2 thumb scrolls, it's too much, right?
Yeah. Which is true. It's like, it can be brief, right? Use your words succinctly.
Yep.
And make them impactful. And you're going to get a response that you probably want to get.
Totally.
Let's go. That's what's up. Moving into negotiation. I think objection handling is still something that, it's always a new thing for me too. So I think in terms of how you handle that in the moment, like what is going on in your head, or what are you suggesting to your team members to handle those objections that, might potentially lose the deal? Like, how do you turn it into an opportunity?
Yeah. Again, go back to what should every sales guy do? Be listening 80% of the time and only talking 20% of the time. I would dig into the objections, like ask questions like, what makes you concerned about that? Like it is just, you have to seek to understand. The biggest thing sales reps, and I get this because we get caught up in the moment of a deal, of an opportunity. That just means we haven't asked enough questions, right? We haven't dug into whether it's timing, whether it's motivation, whether it's our offering may not be compelling enough. Their desire to have what we are offering just may not be the tie-in. Is like, we haven't made it compelling enough for them to act. So for me, it's like seeking to understand, like we just haven't asked enough questions.
Sure.
So keep digging on those objections. Like what makes you concerned about that? Why do you think this is an issue, right? Like have them walk you through specifically, like dig into actually the hot spots of why they're saying no, or they're just not willing to act now.
Yep.
Question for you. There's this thing in this book called Pitch Anything by Oren Clough called The Power Frame. How do you do with like somebody that's just like basically a hard ass in the room? Like how do you kind of like push through the glass and break it?
It's an awesome question. And if you ever take any negotiations classes, and if you've ever negotiated with, like I took a negotiations class with like a whole contingent of Israeli folks. Mm-hmm. Their entire negotiations tactic is just to be a hard ass. And like what I've recognized with that is you have to spin quickly because they are trying to drive and keep you focused on how you respond. And so you have to make it bigger and broader and quickly start to spin the conversation back about them. And so like breaking through the glass is kind of maybe one way of doing it, but I would actually say you've got to start pivoting the conversation a little bit to kind of round trip on them to figure out like you're going to, hey, I understand that you have, I understand by your tone and your voice that, this is not hitting the mark for you. So tell me what's going to hit the mark for you. Let them open it up for you.
Yeah, spin it.
So you have to spin it because otherwise, like they're going to come and keep coming harder, right? And we've all
I like that you acknowledge it.
Yeah,
tell by your body language you're not, call it out, right?
This is clearly not hitting the mark for you. So I like tell me what makes you respond,
right?
Right? Because like clearly what I'm doing isn't working, so we're going to spin this on you and what makes you tick, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think another approach, and this is the theme for our listeners, is prep. How do you enter into a great negotiation? Like our CEO gets prepped like I've never seen anybody. Bill McDermott wants very specific questions answered. He rehearses them. Then he goes into the call. He knows personally what they're all about, where they went to college, who they're connected to. Like the dude is dialed in.
That's awesome.
So how do you handle the tough guy in the room? You prep. You over prep, right? And then I love your spin type of, comment there. Hey, this is getting a little uncomfortable. Like, how do you keep it real?
Yep.
And I think people can kind of sense if you're really good at keeping it real. And I think that helps. Helps with a tough guy.
And I'm sure you've read that book, the FBI Negotiator. I think it's Never Negotiate the Middle. I think
I haven't read that. So no.
He was a former famous FBI negotiator. And he's on the speaking circuit right now. But his whole thing is like start asking questions with no. So is there any reason why you would not? Right? And it's like what? And, he spins that on you.
Yeah,
and so is there any reason why you wouldn't do this?
Yeah.
Well, yes, no, wait, what?
Yeah. Who's on first?
Yeah. But he asked questions in a very pragmatic way where it's like, you're forced to start to say yes the way he asks you the questions.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of starts to spin that entire conversation.
Yeah.
So.
I love it.
Love that. Moving into social selling, how is that something you're coaching your team to leverage?
We've done it very poorly, frankly, right? I mean, we put a ton of stuff out on LinkedIn, and I would argue, like, I wrote this post on LinkedIn probably about a year ago where I was just as frustrated with LinkedIn, where it just has been this like self-promotion, grandstanding platform, and I just kind of got annoyed. Mm-hmm. So I wrote this thing, and next thing you know, I've got 30,000 views on LinkedIn.
Wow.
It's just kind of, but because I'm like, we needed, like, as a salesperson, I'm like, we've missed the mark, right? Sellers have missed the mark on LinkedIn because everyone's posting all this stuff, and it's just like this. So I think as a technology person, even just as a seller, like, I think we have a lot of work to do here, right? I just think we have just missed the mark, and I think there's a definitely great opportunity to do it. I actually think Twitter might be a better way to do it than LinkedIn, because I think LinkedIn right now has just become such a dumbed down, self-promoting like platform, whereas I think Twitter, you have to be succinct about very specific and actually make more like specific things you want to talk about, versus like LinkedIn, it's like, look at me, look at me, look at me. Whereas, I mean, we were found by a client, an energy drink company in California, that found us on Twitter because of a couple guys that had posted some stuff, and they were going back and forth on Twitter. One of these companies saw us, they're like, hey, you guys seem to know what you're talking about here, because I'm just watching the back and forth going between a couple of your engineers and some of these guys. I'm like, that might be a better way of doing it. Like some of the more organic, but like it's just more real.
Sure.
Like, so I think we I can speak for like a tech consulting company. I think we missed the mark there. I don't think we've done a very good job there, but I do think the power is there, right?
Yeah.
It just is. I just think you got to do a little bit differently.
Yeah. The video, I keep coming into this, like the video.
Yeah.
I was recruiting a woman out of Detroit, and I was looking at her LinkedIn feed. and she did a really nice job of on video talking to one of her solutions. Like, who does that?
That's awesome.
Like, not many people do that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's like some kind of, innovative thing to do. Like, wow, I just think it's somewhat easy to do, but it just takes time.
Yeah.
And I clicked that, and I got to listen to her style and how she positioned. And
that's
awesome.
I
was like, man, she's super talented.
Yeah.
And then listening to the comments that are coming from customers or whomever else is in that network. But that technology is here.
Yep.
Why aren't we doing it?
Yeah.
Well, because we don't make it a priority. Back to your point, Tony.
Yep.
It's not a priority. We haven't carved out enough time to differentiate ourselves. Yeah. I just think it's easy to do, but we just don't take the time to do it.
Yeah. Great point.
All right, D. These quick hits aren't so quick, but we got gold coming in, so it's good.
One last question. As a seller, you're building relationships with executive level clients. Like, what, outside of knowing the product, doing your homework, like what's that it factor that separates a seller from the crowd of people that are trying to sell to these people?
I might answer it a different way. I think it's more about understanding what matters to that executive. So I asked that question very specifically. I'm like, how are you measured? How are you bonused? How are you gold? And and of course, when I'm out with my sales reps at a dinner, they'll like kick the table when I say, how are you bonused? I'm like, I'm not asking how much. And of course, I do the pregnant pause. I wait there for a second. I'm like, I'm not asking how much you're bonused. What I'm asking for is I want to know specifically how you're measured. Because if I understand how you're measured and what your goal and actually what you care about, I can bring a lot different, a whole different resources to the table. So I would say, again, going back to what is important to that specific executive, like what do they care about? How are they measured, right? Because I mean, if you understand that, you can bring your entire product set to help them how your products or services can solve their problem.
Yeah, love it.
Really good.
Awesome.
Well, man, listen, Tony, it's been outstanding. It's been great having you in studio. Thank you for making the drive. Appreciate having you here. Demetri, great seeing you. Scotty, well done.
Billy, you're the man.
Everybody.
Yeah, Tony,
thanks,
thank
Steve.
you on behalf of G.O.A.T Gravy. This has been a really fun podcast. Thank you. Your T-shirt, wear it with pride.
Can I cut off the sleeve so I can work on it?
Absolutely.
Please.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, send us a pic of that, please.
We're going to order some tanks for you in the future. Yeah.
I love it.
Awesome. Well, hey, have a great weekend, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
And that brings us to the end of another episode of the G.O.A.T Gravy. We've shared some awesome insights and strategies aimed at enhancing your journey in sales. And the conversation does not have to stop here. So be sure to follow us on social media at the G.O.A.T Gravy and explore more at thegoatsgravy.com. Your journey towards sales mastery is ongoing, and we're here to support you at every step. So thank you for tuning in today. Stay curious, stay driven, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.